What does every American or every citizen need to know about the economy that you feel is missing in everyday conversation?
So the first thing they don't know is unemployment is acceptable within what policymakers are trying to do. And too many people believe that unemployment is an individual action. You didn't look for a job, you're lazy, I can find a job. But quite deliberately, when we think of what tax policy is going to be, what government spending is going to be, where we're going to set interest rates, no one is planning for the street understanding of no unemployment. Everybody thinks, oh, all you got to do is just want a job. Okay, but it's not designed that way. It is not designed that way. It is designed, there will be unemployment. So people have, that's the most important thing from my perspective that people don't get. Now, in this big policy scheme of agreeing that no one is trying to get zero unemployment, it isn't the case that at that big level that they're necessarily picking on you. So that's why it can feel like maybe it's something personal I'm not doing, because no one sent the letter to me saying, Bill Spriggs, you're going to be unemployed. So I don't think it's personal that way. But everyone knows that there are disparities in how that plays out. That's understood. So everyone knows that it's not exactly 2 to 1, because that's not true. But it averages to a number like 2 to 1. The unemployment rate for blacks would be twice the one for whites. They know that. So when they design the economy so that 4% is where they think the unemployment rate should be, or that's as much as they're going to try and get to, they fully understand that the black unemployment rate is going to be 8.
And they don't care.
And from their perspective, yes, it's like, okay, and
collateral damage.
It's collateral damage, exactly. So think of it like the economists who do this policy making, they're like bomber pilots. They drop bombs, and just like Julianne said, I know 1 or 2 of them missed. I know somebody going to church got bombed.
Sorry,
yes, exactly. But that's the collateral damage. I'm trying to hit these factories, I hit a church. Well, I'm not going to be precise. And once you have that understanding that that's the lowest they plan to get it. It's not planned to be lower than that. Then you begin to understand the stress on our economies when they mess up. And instead of getting what they think is full employment, like 4%, which is 8% for us, they mess up. We're at 10% like that. So for the entire period of what they called the recovery in the 80s, we had double-digit unemployment each and every month. Now, we have internalized that. We need more education, our kids need to know to do this, they need to know to do that, and we have turned that against ourselves. First off, test scores have absolutely, positively zero to do with black-white unemployment differences. Zero. Nil, nada, nothing.
Dumb white people are more likely, dumb white people who have dropped out of high school are more likely to get a job than black high school graduates. Dumb white people often are more likely to get a job than black college graduates. So it has nothing whatsoever to do with education. It has to do with a number of other things. So I wanted you to finish your point because I want to take this in another direction.
Well, but it's good to reemphasize that, because what we tend to do is then we say it's the school system. But understand the test scores ain't got nothing to do with it. oh, well, they're failing our kids because look at our test scores. And as if the test score you didn't get the job because you were black.
Like I said, dumb white people.
Yes, you didn't get the job because you were black. It had nothing to do with the test score. So the result is we have attacked ourselves and our own communities, and we believe in this deficiency model. There's something deficient about us. And if we would just get it right, then somehow. Now, the illusion is brought home because, yes, it is true. If you are black and a college graduate, you will have a much lower unemployment rate than if you are a black high school dropout. There's no doubt about that. But you won't have a white college graduate
Yeah, I would say,
unemployment
but
rate.
if you are a black college graduate, you will have a much higher rate than a white college graduate. And if you're a black woman with a PhD, you will earn about $1,000 a week on average, whereas a white man will earn $1,666 a week. Black man, white woman, about $1,250. So you can do everything you're supposed to do to fix you, but fixing you doesn't fix the economy. So what I want to talk about, to just dial back what Bill said a bit, is the nature of a predatory capitalist economy and what it really means. Economics is a study of who gets what, when, where, and why. So when we economists are looking at how stuff gets distributed. In a capitalist economy, people are paid based on their ownership of factors of production. In other words, land gets rent, and labor gets wages, and capital gets interest, and brilliance or whatever gets, entrepreneurial ability gets profit. But here's the deal. I used to be white folks' factor of production. I mean, we used to be owned. And so the question of how you ever begin to catch up from having been owned is a huge question. So when we do these distribution,
nobody ever pays the machine. Remember that.
And we were the machine. So when we look at that, you got to step it back. And when you step it back and look at that, then what you're looking at is a system that is rigged. Now, what's the difference between predatory capitalism, compassionate capitalism, socialism, and something else? Because, see, I think that 2016 was a triumph of predatory capitalism, but we were still going to have capitalism with Hillary, but we might have had compassionate capitalism. Capitalism is about profit maximization. You want to make sure that you get the most money that you can from your factors of production. Compassionate capitalism says, well, yeah, but as Henry Ford says, Henry Ford paid workers enough so they could buy the cars they were manufacturing. So he priced the cars to make them affordable, and he paid the workers enough so that they could buy the cars. Now you have people, I mean, when I was, in my 20s, you bought a car, you had like a 3-year loan on it. Now people have 6 and 7 year loans on cars. They're refinancing cars like people refinance their homes, which is totally economically crazy, but that's what people are being pushed to. So predatory capitalism says, I'm going to extract every penny from you. We will not raise the minimum wage. We will not provide affordable health care. We're going to make sure that the capitalists get everything. Compassionate capitalism isn't a lot better, but it says, we're going to try to help you out. So if I call capitalism the wolf, and I call government the dentist. So the wolf is evil by nature. I think that capitalism by nature has an evil component to it. Because whenever you say maximize profit, you mean minimize costs, and labor is one of those costs. But the compassionate dentist would say, well, maybe we better raise the minimum wage because we want to make sure that people buy stuff, because 75% of economic growth is consumer spending. President Obama, as an example, with the executive order, said that if you had a federal contract, you had to pay at least $10 an hour. So that was compassionate capitalism. Wasn't perfect, but it was better than saying $7.25. This person over there, 45, he doesn't want to, he wants to keep the minimum wage where it is, if not eliminate it. He wants to eliminate the EEOC. Richard Nixon. I'm not a big old Nixon fan. With 1972, we moved some U-Hauls outside the White House. and sat there waiting for him to come on out. You know, that was our little protest. It was 72 or 74. Anyway, I'm old. But in any case, he actually initiated the Minority Business Development Agency using the term, remember, economic justice. Richard Nixon using the term, yes, but using the term economic justice. Now you have this person who wants to zero out the Minority Business Development Agency, just a paltry little $32 million, which is less than 1/100th of 1% of the total budget. So what people need to understand about the economy is that it's about distribution, and it's about who makes distribution decisions under a backdrop of capitalism, which can either go predatory or compassionate, none of which is fair. But either way, one way is going to make people much worse off. The other people is going to make people comfortably worse off.
Well, and the funny part of it is, it's like in the movie Lion King, right? When Mustafa dies and the lions get in with the hyenas, they make the system unbalanced, right? They forget there's a cycle of life. So you can be predatory and eat all your food, and then everybody starts to starve because you've destroyed the balance. So what happens is, if the wolf is in charge of the whole thing, the wolf forgets you can't eat all the sheep. You actually need the compassion for the system to work. And the trick that has been done on the American people is, we've been told, well, you got to look out for the wolf, but we're the sheep. And somehow or another, we believe that our only job is to eat the grass to be fat enough for the wolf to eat us. And that's where we are. So we're actually on the side. We think, if you ask most people, and this is how this fool got elected, they think it's actually good for the economy if I make the wolf happy. So
understanding that the wolf will never be happy.
Exactly.
That you can eat up everything and then have dessert and still not be happy. And what we have to layer into this conversation is the matter of race, and the matters of class, because what 45 got in, because he had a coded way of talking about poor people and black people and brown people that made white people, who are no better off than these poor people, black people and brown people, feel like, oh, he's got my back. But he didn't have their back. Their kids are not going to be drinking beer with him at Mar-a-Lago. You know, they're not going to be playing with Ivanka's kids. I mean, he's not your dude, but they somehow feel that, and he's got this core of about 35% of the population who, no matter what he does to them, they've got pre-existing conditions. They have diabetes. They
need food stamps.
Yeah, he's going to cut food stamps, but they're still thinking, but he's my guy, because he's been able to do this racial coding that every president has done.
Well, he has learned the book of the Southern Democrats and now the Republican Party. So for Southern whites, it was always, as Dr. King said, let them eat Jim Crow. I'm not helping out white people. They're starving. Their kids need better education, but they can eat Jim Crow. And they ate it. And that's what he manipulated, was their sense that somewhere there's this secret thing that can happen, that we get to eat Jim Crow and we're going to be okay. And what he isn't doing is realizing, no, these people are past that. They understand they can't eat Jim Crow. They were willing to listen to it because they thought, right, he's going to give us this dish. But at the end of the day,
but they're not passing.
I think they are, in the sense that they were willing to elect him thinking that he was going to come up with this other formula. But at the end of the day, as you pointed out, they still need Medicaid. They still need food stamps. The counties that are most reliant on those are not black counties. Those are the Trump counties.
But Bill, when you look at these,
he's not going to deliver to them.
But when you look at these surveys that have been done, and of course surveys are fungible and all of that, he's got this core. There's 35%, and they're not all rich people. That's the top 1%. So you've got these people who are being screwed and who are smiling as they're being screwed because they still somehow value white skin privilege and this rhetoric over their own economic well-being. And we've seen this happen time and time again historically.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right for now. But as you can see in some of these town hall meetings that some of those congressmen returning those districts are seeing, is these folks are waking up and they realize, especially in Appalachian counties in Kentucky, they realize Medicaid is keeping me alive. The cap that Obamacare took off of healthcare expenditures is keeping them alive. They know that once this bill that they propose gets enacted, this thing that they say, oh, you should celebrate because now you don't have to buy health insurance that you didn't want. No, they need health insurance. So they are waking up. They're getting angry about it.
You have more faith in them than I do.
Well, I do because they have played this game as far as it could be played. Their predatory nature ate away at the last salvation. This is why these people were so upset, because up till now, the white working class had been buffered. They had been part of a wink, wink, nod, nod. Okay, we know these policies are hurting American people. We know they're impoverishing American people, but somehow or another, we're holding on for you. And then this recession occurred, and then they realized, no, you're not, and you didn't include us in the deal. Somewhere y'all reneged. But they thought he was reigniting the deal because now he's talking to them and saying, oh, I get it. And so they think he's trying to reignite the deal, but they understand that part of the deal is, no, you got to deliver for us, and he's not.
We're sitting here in the AFL-CIO building where you're, of course, the senior economist or the chief economist or the poobah, and we love that. 35% of organized labor, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a significant number. 35% of organized labor, according to one of the studies I saw, voted for 45. These are people who saw their power erode. You know, there's an open seat or two on the NLRB because Congress wouldn't support any Obama nominees for the NLRB. We see union participation down. We're in the very low teens.
Single digits for the private sector.
Yeah, very, very low numbers. And the only way that individual workers, I mean, unless you're Shaq, you don't go into your employer and say, let's cut a deal. I mean, if you're the clerical worker, you're the iron worker, the only way you cut a deal is because of collective bargaining. And collective bargaining has been weakened significantly. So these are people who see their power leaving them, and they're still voting for 45. And even today, as Pew and others do these studies, they find that there's this core. Now, the core may shift. You may be right. But I really do believe that while the economic issues are the really important issues, I think the most important issues, I think the other piece of this is that the cultural issues are the ones that people slide in on culture and they erode economics. And in sliding in on culture, there's all this stuff. When Mike Mulvaney said, you disabled people need to work, now I don't know too many people in wheelchairs who are faking being in wheelchairs. Right. I mean, and that to me was just so repulsively.
Well, but see, that's where they're hurting themselves because, like these congressmen who want to pick on Medicaid, these same folks who voted for him out of racial loyalty understand you just picked on me, and they've told them this.
But some of them are willing to lose money, Bill, because of that.
Well, no. The ones who are willing to lose money are the ones who aren't ill, who aren't suffering from the disabilities of having been overworked. But the ones who understand that they're talking about, it's just like what happened with Romney when he spoke about the 46%. And people then suddenly understood, oh, wait, you're including me. People are understanding when Mulvaney said this silly thing about disability benefits. One, he said they weren't part of Social Security when they clearly are part of Social Security.
Yeah.
This is a full part of the act. Two, people who apply for Social Security disability overwhelmingly never work again, whether they get the benefit or not. So the idea that people fake it isn't
And
true.
many of them spend a year or two with lawyers
Trying
attempting to
to get it.
establish that they fell and broke their back. Well, can you look at my broke back and see that it's broke? Or do
Yes,
I have to
exactly.
actually prove this? And you've had people have to prove it. You have people with all kinds of challenges that they've had to deal with. So it just
and they don't return to work because the disability is real.
Is-
So it's not as if we could get tougher and then get the rolls down. If we got tougher, it just means we'd have more people who weren't working. Not
only
people.
not working, more people who are poor, more people who need stuff, more people who, if these disabled people don't get their disability, what they're going to end up doing when they have medical emergencies is they're going to go to the emergency room, and then everybody else, the county, is going to have to pick that up, which means the state will have to pick that up, which means we create another burden. And so basically this entire budget is about taking stuff and pushing it down to the states who have all had challenges.
And have all refused them in the same states where they let predatory behavior go amok. And so, I mean, I absolutely think you're right. I mean, race matters, and you cannot deny that. And there are these people who will cling to that. And what did Charlton Heston say? You have to rip it off my dead body. They're going to cling to it till they die. But
We'll die soon.
But many of these same folks voted for President Obama, and they switched because they really do understand that they've been ripped off. They understand that they've been lied to, and that they aren't being delivered to.
But Obama wasn't the one who lied to them. Now, in fairness to these people, it's very rare that the same party holds on to the White House for 3 terms. So it was time for, I mean, just
want to change.
just taking it back. It was time for, but how do we end up with the orange orangutan? I mean,
The issue of being unemployed is self-reported, so it depends on how that person sees themselves. If they see themselves as an entrepreneur, then they show up as employed, because he would claim, I did something for money, and if they view themselves truly as an entrepreneur, then they'll say, I did something for money, and I employ myself. If, on the other hand, all of their work is helping relatives unpack their apartment when they are about to be evicted, and he gets paid money to help do that, and that's all he does, he may not think of himself as an entrepreneur. And many African Americans will not think that's a job.
it's not.
But technically the question is, did you do something for work for which you were paid?
If your folks were being evicted, Bill, they didn't have no money.
No,
You got $20 and a pizza.
Okay, but I'm just saying. In the Hispanic community, on the other hand, because many of those who don't have documents do day labor all the time, they are far more likely to answer the question, yes, I was employed. So part of it shows up just on this perception. Do I culturally consider that a job? And as Julianne said, no, you didn't have one, so you're right to say you didn't have one. Pizzas don't count. So there's this cultural difference. Does it show up in the economy? Yes, because your transactions will show up. So if you're importing shea butter, that's going to show up because we're going to see the import. Even if you're trying to be on the sly and you don't report your income and you're not filling out your IRS tax forms and doing that, when you spend the money, you will show up in the economy because we will see you spend the money. Now, there are 2 ways of getting at measuring the size of the American economy, all those transactions. And one is looking at who got paid, and the other is looking at what did they spend. Those are showing increasing disparities. Part of that, many economists believe, is because of this rise of a casual economy. So I won't see everything reported on the income side because people are trying to hide it. But the moment they spend it, we capture it. So it gets measured. It's part of the system.
And the measurements might not show up in the unemployment rates, but I think what we have to look at is the weakness of the traditional labor market has pushed a lot of people into various forms of casual employment, into, you say, selling the shea butter. I don't know what Etsy is, but selling the shea butter. People who are doing websites, who are doing all kinds of things, who are providing personal services, Uber, stuff like that. Well, Uber steals from people,
Yes.
among other things. But, I mean, like, never mind. This is a whole long story. But, people who are doing things that often employ cash transactions that are, quote, on the side, under the table, or not even under the table, over the table. And that's just become increasing because the number of good jobs out there, even most people, I mean, without using a stereotype, and your folks are going to probably call it right, whatever, but Jamaicans have 9 jobs. Most Jamaicans have 9 jobs. This is just a stereotype, but it could be true. But I used to always tell students, at Bennett, have a plan A, B, C, D, and E. You're working for the man, you're braiding hair, you're baking cakes, you're saving money for the business that you want to start, and that's all good. Now, I did not give them reporting advice. That would have been beyond my scope. Some of them probably reported and some of them did not. But what we know is that the labor market that our grandparents or even our parents knew, or even that we know as boomers, is not the labor market that millennials are going to experience. People aren't going to have jobs for 30 years or 20 years. There's going to be a lot of movement, and there are going to be times when I always tell people, one of the things I did at Bennett College I was really proud of was started a minor in entrepreneurship that once I left turned into a major. Board was evil, they wouldn't let me have it, but once I left they turned into a major. Because I tell people, you will be an entrepreneur at a point in your life whether you want to be or not. Either you're going to be an entrepreneur inside because you're going to have to sell yourself to your corporation, but if you're laid off and you need to make the mortgage, you're going to figure out how to make that mortgage, whether it's selling Avon or all this multi-level marketing stuff that's out there. You're going to be doing something. And there are some things, as Bill said, that the economy, that our data is going to basically capture when you spend it, if not when you get it. But there's also going to be some stuff that's not captured. I think I'm very interested in the way that many millennials who've been sidelined have managed the economy. I have a nephew who graduated class of 2008, and that was a horrible class for young people to graduate in. He had a job that was rescinded. He had an offer and then it was rescinded. It has happened with many of his friends. They were doing some of everything. They tried to start some little company, it didn't work. The high point of his offline career was delivering medical marijuana, because the people in the flatlands in Oakland said, Sonny, I can't tip you, just roll yourself something. Whereas the people, in the hills gave him nice tips. But there were so many other young people like him who were just trying to make it. And for too many young people with degrees and skills, they're trying to make it.
And succeed. Part of this understanding that the unemployment rate is planned is understanding that entrepreneurship doesn't get you out of that box. I can only make my business work if there's enough demand. So you got to back it up a step, right? If I'm a seamstress and there isn't enough work for a tailor to hire me, so my idea is I'm going to start a business of my own being a seamstress, there's not enough business for you either. So you can't always just entrepreneur yourself out of it. If we're not creating the size demand that's necessary, and you asked before, what does the government do? The government can play that role. The government has the ability, because it can go into debt at will, ad infinitum. It can create demand when no demand is being created. So if consumers are losing jobs, losing incomes, if businesses are losing income, then the government has the authority to step in. And it can create jobs. It does have the ability to create the demand.
How does government create jobs?
One is directly, because it has the ability to borrow when other people can't. When the economy tanked in 2008, no one was going to get a loan. People were being foreclosed on. Banks weren't going to lend them money. The government has the authority to borrow money. The government can go in and say, we're going to borrow money, and we're going to hire the hundreds of thousands of teachers that got laid
and
off.
send money, and they sent money to communities.
Which
so,
they did.
So when you got that bailout, part of that was money going to communities where then people could hire. So cities were able to hire librarians who might have been laid off otherwise, were able to engage in building and roads projects and construction projects and things like that. So government can do two things. One, it can do direct or indirect hires in the manner that we've described, using federal dollars to hire or to give money to entities to hire. But the other way that government can do benefit job creation is to create a climate that is healthy for job creation. I mean, having minority business development and things like that create a climate. Increasing the minimum wage creates a climate. There are a number of other things that can be done to create a climate. I think that President Obama, at some level, attempted to do some of that, not as much as I would have liked, but some. I think that person in the White House currently has attempted to roll very much of that back. So government plays a key role, and it can also help the states and local governments play a key role in terms of any number of things. One of the pieces of data that's always troubled me.
And there's one of those, but he's playing on, this one is playing on a myth, which is the other way government can do it is it tries to put more money back into the economy. So that's why we need tax cuts.
So you give money to the rich people who are not going to spend the money, who are not going to invest the money, who are not going to do anything with the money. But the theory is if you give money to the rich people, they will then hire all the poor people. So when people tell you that a budget is a moral statement, morally, for the past 40 years really, since Reagan, we've been saying that people don't matter, that education doesn't matter, that health care doesn't matter, that hunger doesn't matter, that when we look at cities and towns and communities, that vitality doesn't matter, that public transportation doesn't matter. We've been saying that in any number of ways, and although we've had, a Clinton administration which was somewhat compassionate capitalism, somewhat, but also horrible and draconian when it came to criminal justice. And then we've had, of course, the Obama years.
And horrible when it came to treating single mothers as workers.
Exactly, with welfare reform,
Yes.
which basically said, with welfare reform. So you're right, those are the two real flaws. So I don't understand why black folks run up, hugging up on those Clintons like they're our next best friends. I mean, there were better people than other people we might have seen on the political spectrum, but welfare reform caused him to lose some very good people in his administration because they could not morally deal with that. And then we had the Obama years where, again, I think there was an attempt to infuse some compassionate capitalism. But if you look at our budgets from 1980 until now, what you're going to do is indict America for its lack of compassion.
Because the key from the 1980s forward is that what gets presented to the American people, if the government is on the side of creating jobs, is it's done through tax cuts.
But we have no evidence of that.
Well, this is correct, but if there's an economics that people think they know, if they think they passed the class, that's what they think they know, is that tax cuts to the wealthy generate jobs, generate business investment, and that's what you need. All of our inability to invest in people has gone because we've given all these tax cuts. And we get taught a lesson that somehow or another, tax cuts are free, spending is not. So if a politician says, our schools are falling apart, we need to have 21st century schools. Oh, you're spending money, that's bad. I'm going to give $1 trillion tax cut to the Trump family. Oh, that's good. You just spent $1 trillion.
Because they're going to spend it, because they're going to trickle it down. And we see it in this budget with this whole notion of infrastructure, which is one of the most frightening things, where they're going to spend a little bit of money. They want to now privatize bridges and roads and all of this. So, you ride down the highway, ride on 95, the tolls will be now collected by some corporation who can do whatever they really want to do. And these dollars that they spend that they quote save by allowing this corporation to purchase a public good are supposed to be used to produce more public goods. And essentially what's being done.
And their great myth is, and no taxpayer paid for it. It's like, okay, but when my car went down the road and I paid the toll, am I not a taxpayer who just paid for this?
Well, not only that, when the road that you invested in as a taxpayer is sold, what is that saying? So someone took your investment. You invested in a road. 95 going up, you got to stop here, stop there, pay all those little $3 here, $2 there, $4 there. You invested in that road, and the dollars are going into the public coffers to maintain that road. But now your investment has been hijacked to give to someone in the private sector to do whatever they want to with no accountability. So you're riding down 695 going under that tunnel, and your car hits a pothole, and your axle breaks. Don't let me do car analogies. I don't drive that much, but I think that does happen. Axles break, and then you want to sue somebody. Which, if it happened in a district, you could go to the district.
This is the key point that she's raising, though, because in these public-private partnerships, the overwhelming basic part of the infrastructure was already there. So on 95, the basic highway is there. What these people are doing is they're being given a portion, a right-of-way, but on an infrastructure that already exists. Now, you would think that means I got to pay the government a lot of money,
but
because as she pointed out, your taxpayers already built the road. If you just built 1 mile of the road, 1 mile, you're talking millions of dollars. So we just gave away hundreds of miles, which would be billions of dollars. All you do is add your little 2 lanes.
If not, and you may not even be adding that.
And you may not. You just may be adding, how do I collect the money?
And so part of the challenge, really, when we look at this, of course, none of this, when we talk about budget, one of the other things that people need to understand is that the budget is a wish list from this president. The budget is not the law. So the Congress and the Senate are going to have to bat it out. But of course, the Republicans have both the House and the Senate, and many of them basically prioritize party loyalty over good sense. And in doing so,
in many ways, this is their budget. This looks very much like the budget
Ryan
that
budget.
Paul Ryan
It's
has
a
been
Ryan
advocating
budget
for some time.
But you have those 3 or 4 sensible Republicans in the Senate who are likely to hold their finger into the dike and say this just isn't going to happen. But people need to understand, again, that when we're talking about civics, that this is an engagement opportunity. That at this point, and you see the people going to these town hall meetings, raising high holy hell with these Republicans who don't have the sense they were born with, and they're constantly confronting them about health care. Well, they need to start confronting them about infrastructure, about food stamps, about Medicaid, about all these things. But it's an engagement opportunity because, of course, we have an election coming up in 2018, and of course, the orangutan is already campaigning for 2020. He's already got a campaign fund. He's already running around doing these rallies. He never met a rally that he didn't like. But if you look at his signature, there's some clear signs of instability there, clear signs. But the point is that we need to see the economy and this moment as a real engagement opportunity. We need to see people running for office. We need to see young people running for office. We need to see them not only running for office, but running in posses. We need to stop this notion of this one. There's no such thing as a plastic Jesus anymore. There's no one savior out there. So we need to look at young people running, in posses, in groups. We need to look at them running for everything from city councils to state legislators, not only to Congress and everything else, but we need to, and a lot
of it is at the state level, and there's a tendency for us to ignore the states, but the states are where a lot of the evil is taking place. And those representatives are the most easy to get to because the districts are smaller. And people can't pass up on those people because we live in the states where Medicaid wasn't being expanded. We're the ones who are being cut out. So we have to be the ones who say, no, why can't my state get the federal money to expand Medicaid? Every other state is getting it. Why can't I get it? And we need people to be there when the state budgets are being decided, because states are mirroring this. They are cutting taxes for the wealthy instead of investing. Why is my college tuition going up? Because you back state legislators who've agreed to tax cuts rather than making the investment in your public universities. You've elected state legislators who would rather build a prison than invest in your public university. So it's not a mystery. If they're going to cut the amount of money that the state is spending on education, if you want education, they're saying it's on you. So don't be surprised that college tuition is going up. It didn't become free just because the state didn't pay for it. So you got to pay attention to all the levels, and you can't get into this hype about taxes. The language they are using to justify this budget, we couldn't justify to the people who pay the taxes how we were spending the money. We are in a country where over half the income is held by the top 20%. Over half the income. So what they're really telling you is, to us richest 20%, how do you justify that I and the top 20% need to spend money worrying about whether you eat?
Even though the fact that I don't eat eventually, and that's the challenge, is how people look at timeline, eventually will affect your bottom line. If I don't eat, I'm not going to work. I'm going to lay out on the street, homeless, hungry. I'm going to become a health challenge. When I pass out, when I fall out on the street, someone's going to take me to the emergency room that you then are going to have to pay for. And that people haven't thought that through at all. Instead, what they've done is really allow this rhetoric that suggests that there is some dependent class, when those people who are dependent primarily because people haven't looked at the wage structure and said, if we paid people, they could pay for themselves.
Or we forget that the truly dependent class are those top 1%. Walmart depends on a trade policy that lets them bring in goods from China with impunity so they don't hire Americans. The money does not recycle in the American economy, so that Americans have to accept wages so low, the only place they can shop is Walmart.
And then they
depend on that policy. If you take that policy away from them, they have no strategy. But they want to say, oh, but you're dependent because I have to get you food stamps. No, you're dependent
Walmart
on
workers.
everything.
And let's just, if we want to talk about Walmart, I mean, their wage situation is so bad that workers who work for them take up collections for their co-workers so that they can eat. Now, this is a corporation that runs around, running their mouth about what they're trying to do. I don't know a day that something doesn't show up on my Facebook page with them talking about we have worker flexibility. But meanwhile, here's what worker flexibility means. They had the what's the labor organization, UFCW. We were on that task force at a point in time, and I don't know if you remember the call where this woman was talking about how she worked at Walmart, her husband worked at Walmart. Neither of them had 30 hours a week. They had like 28. They were just jerking them around. So if they got 30 or 35, then they got benefits. So they had them just under that number. And the woman told the story about just how bad they're, and they had 3 kids. The most poignant part of that call, that I'll never forget it, was that at the end of the call, I think you're right, she said, and we're white. And so there were 2 things going on here.
Yes, they understood there's supposed to be something called white privilege, but there is no white privilege in this predatory world. The wolf is eating everybody.
But so it's almost like she's like, and this shouldn't happen to white people. I mean, it's supposed to happen to black people, but it shouldn't happen to white people. So she tells this horrible story. I knew she was white. She didn't have to tell me, just based on the tone of her voice and everything else. I mean, just how outraged she was, whereas many African Americans in that same situation would have been angry but not necessarily outraged, accustomed to the juggling. Because one of the things she says, I have to decide whether to buy shoes for my oldest child or my youngest child. I have to decide. And that's the nature of poverty. And it's a poverty that now 1 in 6 American households lives in, 1 in 4 African American household and Latino households lives in, 40% of African American children live in. It's not unusual, but it is manufactured because you don't have to have that poverty if you simply pay people.
But see, that's the other part of the lesson, is because of racial stigma, we have absorbed this. So when you hear people say, well, we have to pay attention to the anger of the white working class, it's because in a way we have absorbed this. So we blame ourselves. We blame ourselves if we get a job at Walmart. Oh, I should have gotten more education. Now, if you look at it, most black people at Walmart are beyond high school. Most of them have associate degrees. They're happy they had these associate degrees so they have the Walmart job. But we will still blame ourselves. White people understand, no, this is the way it's supposed to be. I'm not supposed to have worked hard to get this job and be mistreated. I know you're doing me wrong. So it's this play that is used to try and keep the working class docile, keep them in place. And now what they've done is, you see, they've turned on themselves. They've turned on their own people and said, no, y'all ain't in the deal. and it was that awakening that this woman had. I'm not in on the deal. I'm not.
And her voice was so plaintive. She said, we're white.
But the lesson on this, the world learned in 2008, because African Americans buy that, and we looked at ourselves, and throughout the last part of the 20th century and the early part of the 21st century, we must buy homes. Our problem is we're not accumulating wealth. We have to have assets. Ignoring discrimination, ignoring why you didn't have home ownership.
Ignoring the fact that you have a predatory loan.
Exactly the point. So we were set up like the sheep, and we walked right into the trap. Because when we got those predatory loans, we weren't sitting around going, oh, wait, time out. How come white people get 6% and it's a fixed rate, and I'm getting this adjustable rate? And what does that mean? And yes, and no, we walked right into the trap. And if you weren't buying a home and you were black during that period, then people were like, you haven't gotten the Imhotep message, man. We're empowering people. We're going to own land. We're going to fulfill our ancestors' promise.
Yeah.
And and you see, by ignoring the fact that racism is real and racism has consequences, when that trap tricked.
We lost a third of our wealth.
We lost a third of our wealth. And the thing is, though, of course, because the wolf is eating the sheep, they forgot you just poisoned the sheep. So it brought down the whole system. It brought down the whole system.
But you know, the piece, when you talk about this, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, fine. I mean, the fact is that there are two things. If I were to look at the state of African American people from an economic perspective, you'd have a production possibility curve, and we'd be inside it. In other words, we're not doing the most with what we have. But the curve should be pushed out because structural and institutional racism have essentially deprived us of any number of opportunities. There are a whole lot of people. It's not blaming white people. First of all, it's not even about white people. I mean, white people can just go away. Becky and Boris just need to just disappear. But what I'm saying is that we live in a system that structurally exploits, and the easiest people it is to structurally exploit are black people. Structural racism sets us up from the cradle to the grave. We can do everything white people do And again, it's not white people. We can do everything everybody does, and we still won't catch up. I think Sandy Darity, one of our colleagues, wrote a piece that said, if we saved every penny we ever even sideways looked at, it would take 238 years to close the wealth gap. This is including the people who are buying homes or who have bought homes. This is including that little handful, I think 1.6, you know my number, or it's a 2.1% of African Americans own more than $200,000, earn more than $200,000 a year, compared to about 7% of white people. So if we did everything we were supposed to do, we couldn't do enough. So yeah, I don't decry people's effort to be self-sufficient. It's very important to be self-sufficient. It's very important to do all those things you're supposed to do and pay your bills on time and keep your credit score up and all that.
Both of us agree with that. Go to college.
Please go to college. Even if you're not going to do anything with it, go just so you can have good sense. But or at least so you know stuff, so you read, so you engage as a public citizen. But the fact is that structural and institutional racism are real. They're virulent, they're alive, and they're well, and they keep us at the periphery of the economy. So for so many of our young people, especially, and it breaks my heart when it's young people, because so many young people come into the space, optimistic, they graduated from college, they've done their thing, they're thinking the world belongs to me, and that's what young people should think. But our young people are like little children with their nose sitting at the pane of the window at the candy store, and can't reach in there to get it. Some of them will, some of them that are better situated, that have gone to the Ivies, that have gotten the hookup. Some of them will, but many of them won't. The young people who have gone to our state universities, many who've gone to our HBCUs, and I tell you, our HBCU kids are like off the chain. Bill's done some work. They're more likely than many others to graduate in these STEM fields, to do computer science. But these companies are not coming to HBCU campuses to recruit. Now, so the Howard partnership with Google and the Thurgood Marshall partnership with Apple are important, but they're a little drop in the iceberg. We need to be clear that structural racism exists, and all these so-called woke white people, so-called woke white people, because I don't think that white and woke can really be used in the same sentence on a regular basis. Bernie Sanders had to be taught how to say race. He had to be taught how to say reparations. May we please, not please, we demand our reparations. But basically, what I'm saying is that if these people call themselves woke, are really woke, they'll start talking about how you dismantle structural racism. And what it means is this: it means set-asides. If, as Bill said, if it's always going to be 4% to 8%, then what are you going to do to reduce that number? What kind of targeting are you going to do to make sure that you're looking at a population? If you say it to me that the unemployment rate is 4%, but in Appalachia it's 8%, somebody's going to say, we better have an employment program for Appalachia because somehow Appalachia is not doing so well. But how come somebody won't say that for black people? I mean, and when we look at wealth, when you have new industries, we ought to have a pass to get in there first. Everybody wants to sell marijuana. I think black people should be the first people allowed to sell marijuana. Now, not on the street. I mean, in these industries and on the stock market and all that. I'm not advocating, basically drug dependency, although, hey, whatever works. And you can leave that in there.
But remember, Julianne started with, capitalism is this wolf. What has been sold to the American worker is this way of dividing up how to look at themselves as workers. So this higher unemployment rate that we suffer through means that it has allowed the system to paint what do you do for that gap. So there are many people who will rail against people who need food stamps, who need the SNAP program. There are people who will rail against people who need unemployment insurance. They think this has nothing to do with them because in their identity as a worker, well, those are Romney's 46%. But the way that this is played out, no. If I whip on some workers, that means I get to whip on all workers. And it's that separation that has hurt us. That's why they invented Jim Crow, to try and say, okay, here are a set of workers we're going to feed some extra to, which isn't money, which isn't wealth, which isn't access to better education. It's just some puff.
It's psychic well-being. I mean, Toni Morrison used to talk about how when people came to this country, um, one of the first words they learned, I remember this piece she wrote years ago, was the N-word. And so everything else that was wrong with them, they still were better than black person. And having learned that word, so basically white privilege, you can't eat white privilege in general. But you can't eat white privilege. All white privilege allows you to do is to think that you're better than me. And that white privilege allowing you to do that gives you some psychic benefit. It does not add to your paycheck. It does not make you better off. It will not pay your mortgage. But as poor as your pitiful white behind is, you can look at me with all that I got going on. You can look at me and say, but I'm still better than you, black woman, because I got white skin privilege.
And one of the things that happens is you see, it does give them a relative position. So yes, you will see scholars who say, yes, it pays off because look where they get paid compared to black people. Okay, but in absolute terms, you don't eat anything. So they get us playing this relative game. So it's like, oh yeah, well, relatively, yeah, they are better off than we are. They have more wealth. They don't live in poverty as much. Okay, but in the scheme of things, they're two chicken pecks ahead of us in a game in which we're all about to be eaten.
We're all sitting there pecking, looking for the corn,
Yes,
and the
and
fact
we're all about
that
to be
and they're sitting there. But it's a psychic piece. And so it's why in the trade union movement it took so long, and I'm not sure it's even still cool for black and white workers to come together. The only union that really was able to do cross-racial work was the mines, and that was because when you got down in that mine, you had to depend on somebody. But if you look at the history of meat packing, as an example, in Chicago, black people were brought in basically as strike breakers. And because white people wouldn't work with black people. And so they lost wages because they refused to allow black people into the unions. And you can see this played over and over again until the post-World War II era where things began to thaw.
Well, even before then, because remember the UAW was able to form, Ford was the only company that hired blacks in the auto industry. And Ford thought he had protected himself from unionization because he was the only one with an integrated workforce. And he felt quite confident because he was paying for the black churches in Detroit. He had put up a black hospital in Detroit. He thought, I got it. They have to love me. The black workers at Ford unionized. They shocked them. And UAW started at General Motors, but it was able to unionize Ford. That was the last one they were.
The white workers had to begin to understand that they wouldn't have power until they recognized that their black co-workers, they had to coalesce with them.
Yeah, but the end story for everybody is this predatory behavior, which affects all of us, is key and an integral part of what we're observing. And when we internalize against ourselves, we deny what we have been doing. We deny our own agency to overcome that. The only reason we can tell you that if you're black and you have a college degree, that you have an unemployment rate that is so much higher than a white person is because black people got those college degrees.
With a college degree has a supposedly higher unemployment rate than a white person who has a high school diploma. Yes. It's just not a play. So but you're right.
We couldn't tell you these stories if black people weren't doing their best and using their agency against this. We couldn't tell you the stories of why is there a gap between black women with PhDs and white men with PhDs if there weren't black women getting PhDs. So what we do is we deny our own agency when we start saying, "Oh, you just blaming the white man."
Yeah, the blaming the white man thing, and the blaming the white man thing is whack thinking, as far as I'm concerned. This whole notion of, well, we blame white people too much. No, and again, I think the challenge I always have is to take race out of it. I'm not mad at white people. I'm mad at structural and institutional racism. Now, some white people play in that sandbox, some don't. So it's useless to say I'm mad at white people. What we ought to be mad at is a system that systematically oppresses. And the oppression of black people allows also the oppression of other people. Not just white people, our Latino brothers and sisters, our Asian brothers and sisters, our GBLTQ brothers and sisters, our Native American brothers and sisters, who we don't talk about enough. Native American, we talk about the nature of oppression. Our disabled brothers and sisters. A black woman who has a disability earns 12% of what an able-bodied white man earns. 12%. Just a fact. Just saying.